I want to thank you all for coming. Today we're having an exciting presentation on some really cool expansion plans proposed by Amtrak. We'll talk a little bit about who we are for those just joining us. And then we'll have the presentation and some time for questions and answers. For a little bit of background on us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We strive to be the most knowledgeable independent source of what high-speed rail is, why we should build it, and what steps that folks can take in state capitals and at the federal capital and with private companies to make it happen. And then we give you the tools you need in order to educate your leaders in your state capital and in Washington, D.C. We believe in what we call the integrated network approach, where high-speed lines, new lines built for trains going 220 miles an hour plus or minus, connect major cities. Existing lines are put into public ownership in some cases in order to be focused on passenger rail, either on places like the Chicago to Detroit corridor or the Caltrain corridor in Northern California. And then the majority of route miles are going to be on privately owned railroads with the infrastructure built to allow frequent trains at 80 miles an hour over to create a much broader. And in some cases, the trains will go on each type of track in one journey, and sometimes you'll switch between trains and buses in order to complete your journey. Our goals are a big federal program with everybody getting something different, but something for everybody in at least 49 states, including improving the Alaska Railroad. We have interstate highways in Honolulu or in Hawaii and Puerto Rico. Maybe we have a rail program for them as well, but at least 49 states. We need to be very optimistic. We need to plan for success. We need to both do long-term planning now, get some big transformative projects underway while getting a lot more trains running on the existing network as fast as possible. And we believe that we've got to get to a point where railroads make money at this the same way that highway contractors make money building highways and defense contractors make money building weapons. So that's what we're about. If you like what you see today, if you like the work we're doing, please join us. And our website is hsrail.org. And if you go to the Get Involved and get some swag page, you can get a t-shirt or a hat, etc. I want to introduce Derrick with the Government Affairs Department of Amtrak. We've known each other for a long time. We first met when we were trying to get Amtrak to allow bikes on trains. And I remember the first launch of that, a group of us actually went down and took the train from St. Louis to Herman and rode back to St. Louis. And thank you, Derrick, for making your role in making that trip possible. We've got an exciting program to talk about with Amtrak today. And Derrick, I'll let you take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, as Rick said, Derrick James, I take care of government affairs for Amtrak in the Midwest. And these have been very exciting times for us at Amtrak. We've been making a bit of news, I think, is probably one of the reasons that that Rick has had such a great uptake with attendance today. So I'd kind of like to talk about where we are at Amtrak right now with regard to our expansion plans and how I think they fit extremely well with the integrated approach that Rick talked about. Just again, a quick 101. I'm assuming that everybody on this call is pretty familiar with us here at Amtrak. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary as a federally chartered corporation operating the nation's passenger train system. Our vision, our charge is to provide an effective intercity mobility, an intercity passenger rail system for the nation that is trip time competitive. And pre-pandemic, we operated over a 21,000 mile route network with about 300 daily trains serving most of the major cities in the United States, although not always well. From the beginning, I think it's instructive to sort of go back to the beginning for just a moment to give us some context on where we are today. What you have right there before you is, as part of Amtrak's founding, the US DOT actually set up the route network for Amtrak. The private sector railroads had run a slightly more extensive network, although it was basically collapsing because of various reasons, competition from other modes, not really attending to the needs of travelers and how those travel markets were changing. So this is the route network that the US DOT set up for Amtrak. It was a slimmed down network of about 16,000 miles with about 150 trains a day. This is the network today. You'll notice that it looks very familiar. During most of Amtrak's existence, much of our effort was just survival and reversing the slide and the decline in the passenger rail network. Noted, though, is that we are still carrying about twice as many folks as we were at the beginning, despite the route network looking very similar. At the beginning, the first full year of Amtrak, we carried 16 million people. In the last pre-pandemic year, we carried more than 32 million customers on this network. And a lot of that growth, though, has come from the type of corridors that we'll talk about here shortly. This map here, many of you may have seen this. Our signature long distance routes are the ones that are highlighted there in yellow. The red corridor over to the right is our Northeast corridor, where we actually run the right of way. It's one of the busiest, that is the busiest electrified, busiest stretch of railroad in the Western Hemisphere. But what's really noteworthy and I think instructive for us going forward is those blue lines. The blue routes are routes that we operate in conjunction with state governments. And usually those are corridors of less than 500 miles or so, where we operate several trains a day, and the states cover some of the capital costs and they cover the operating losses that may be necessary on those services. That's really where the growth has been in passenger rail in the US. About half of our customers every day travel on those segments that are highlighted there in blue. So remember that going forward. So again, looking back to where we were in 1971, the US has changed a lot. The population has increased by well more than a third in the 50 years since Amtrak's existence, and the population of the US is moving. The US at the time of our founding, we had 49 million people living in the northeastern United States, 35 million in the West, and 63 million in the South. We see that the US population has grown, but the population has shifted. The route network that Amtrak covered back in 1971 does not really meet the needs of the United States of today, much less the United States 30 years from now. Here is a map of the nation that some of you may have seen. Despite being a country, broad, covering a broad geographic area, we are concentrating into what we like to refer to as mega regions. Oftentimes we get opposition to investments in passenger rail, say the US is too large, who's going to take a train from Chicago to Los Angeles? Well, we know that the sweet spot for passenger rail is really in those corridors of 100 to 400, 500 miles. And that's where the US and that's where the American public is settling. I'm from Chicago, so I'm familiar with the Great Lakes region. It's the territory which I cover for Amtrak. Looking at Florida, the Gulf Coast, the Texas Triangle, the Piedmont area, and on the West Coast, lots of population movement. Again, the Northeast corridor is still a very critical, high population area, but the US is spreading out to more of these mega regions. This map here superimposes the existing Amtrak network over the mega regions of where the United States is growing and where folks are moving to. I think, again, what's instructive, the darker the line is where there's more robust Amtrak service. The dashed lines are our long distance routes, which are normally just once a day service. We've got significant population centers in the United States that really don't have the quality or the type of Amtrak service that would lend towards people using it on a regular basis. Atlanta, say, for instance, one of the top 10 metro areas in the country, has one long distance train a day that passes through it. Texas, our, I think, second or third most populous state in the United States, only has 3 Amtrak routes, one of which is a corridor service. The other 2 are long distance services, some, again, passing through in the wee hours of the night, not really providing the level of service that we think those taxpayers deserve. Here's a representation of, again, the differences in service that exist across the network. The Northeast Corridor, again, where we actually own the route, 60 million persons living there, a lot more daily frequency, a lot more uptake in Amtrak service. There's a railroad culture that exists in that part of the country because of the level of service that we've been able to provide. So at Amtrak, we think the way to fix this is to provide more service in the population, in the places where Americans live, developing more intra-regional service, connecting the communities within those mega regions, which you saw on the previous map. We need to look at how do we go big, how do we grow Amtrak service so that it serves more of the US population. We all know this. We think investments in passenger rail make a lot of sense. We think that passenger rail investments allows for more sustainable travel. It increases mobility for all sorts of populations, and we think it provides economic value not only to the nation as a whole, but to the communities in which we hope to provide service to. All sorts of sustainability pluses for passenger rail. Passenger rail is way more efficient than other modes, both air and travel by personal automobile. We think that we know that passenger rail trips emit much less emissions into the environment than those other modes. And we see the coming demographics have a preference, and they will change their travel habits to shift to modes that are sustainable if those travel modes are actually there and present for them to use. We think mobility is important. I have a map that I'll show you shortly, which provides a graphic representation of traffic congestion and how the traffic congestion in these mega regions is really, really untenable. And passenger rail has a role, we think, to play in providing people with travel options. The country is urbanizing again, so passenger rail can play a role in providing that. Here again is an estimation in 2045 of where we will see peak travel on the interstate system, where the congestion will be such that travel by car will become more and more unpleasant. So folks will be looking for an alternative mode. And you can see the thickness of the red lines really coincides with those mega regions and where the population is living in 2045. So again, rail can play a role there. We think there's a business case to be made for passenger rail. We think that passenger rail is part of a larger network, again, of possible future high-speed lines, of better transit service, of connection to bike share. Our vision that we're going to put forward will have connections to air travel. This is not about modes competing with one another, but this is about each mode bringing to the table what it does best in providing sort of seamless travel options within regions throughout the country. We think that rail, again, the economic benefits will accrue to not only large cities that are the anchors of the corridors we'd like to provide, but also provide economic benefits to the smaller intermediate communities that have lost out as the air system as airlines have pulled out of smaller markets and as intercity bus carriers have pulled out as well. And as always, I'm glad to say that rail jobs, both the jobs that are directly supported and those ancillary jobs in construction are well-paying jobs. We know that this works. We've seen examples of it. This sort of incremental development that we would like to see in passenger rail. The state of Virginia is a state that we are working with to advance an aggressive expansion that includes growing the base service, which the state of Virginia already had with several frequencies a day, connecting the Northeast Corridor with Richmond, with the Tidewater region of Newport News and Norfolk, and with Roanoke. We're working with the state to acquire additional capacity on the host railroad network so that we can begin to increase frequencies. And these improvements build upon previous improvements as existing riders travel more, as the service becomes more convenient, as we expand to include service to additional cities, like expansions from Roanoke over to Blacksburg and Christiansburg. The state of Virginia is even looking at a route that crosses the state and doesn't even connect to the Northeast Corridor directly, because they see rail as a way to really transform the state and improve mobility across the state. And that's what we want to do across the country. Part of the reason that we're making news at Amtrak is because we have put forward our proposal to the Congress, and we're airing this in the public, our proposal to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Bill, which expires in the fall, expires at the end of this fiscal year. And part of our reauthorization proposal is to make some changes to that legislation that will allow Amtrak to put forward an aggressive vision of growing corridors. We think that the time to do this is now, that the successes that we have at Amtrak have demonstrated in growing our ridership on our existing network, on reducing our operating losses, has given us a level of bipartisan support, which we think would support our vision for growth. We think that the nation coming out of this pandemic is well positioned to make some investments in our infrastructure that would ready the country for the nation of the future, a nation that is addressing its climate needs, a nation that is becoming more urban, a nation that is becoming more diverse. So we are, in our reauthorization proposal, which we submitted to Congress, seeks $59 billion for various things, including the corridor expansion program, including reinvestments in the fleet, including investments in our infrastructure. There's a large backlog of need in the assets that we own at Chicago Union Station, where I am, along the Northeast Corridor, and really to invest in the host railroad network as well, to be able to deliver a level of service that we think the country can support. That reauthorization plan, again, is seeking multi-year funding for passenger rail, reliable funding, so that we can make these investments, so that we can make the long-term investments to grow the system. We think that a passenger rail trust fund makes a lot of sense, so that we can really plan going forward and not make investments on a year-to-year basis. We think that our reauthorization proposal will strengthen our relationship with the federal planners, with the state governments, and again, allow for investments in the system to make passenger rail the preferred mode of transportation in corridors between 100 and 400 miles. We want to seek an update to the Section 209 policy, which governs our relationships with the state. The states are in with us on that, on making changes that will make our accounting more transparent and share the costs in a way that we think are fair. And the backbone of our system is really the long distance network. And so we're seeking improvements to that network as well, including investments in new rolling stock so that that network can continue to service for 50 years going forward. We know that the problem that we've had, again, is that we have not seen the level of federal investments that go to other modes, and our bold vision, we think, starts to begin to correct that. So that vision, again, It's about a corridor development plan that really takes advantage of the sweet spot of passenger rail, those 100 to 500 mile corridors that deliver a low carbon mobility for the nation. Here's the list of the routes that we would like to see added to the Amtrak network over the next 15 years. We would like to add almost 40 new corridor routes and make improvements to 25 existing corridor routes. Take a look there. You will see many of the corridors, or most of these, are within the mega regions that I identified on the previous map. It has been exciting over the past couple of months or so to begin to have conversations with local officials in places like Columbus, Ohio, Crestline, Cincinnati, Duluth, Minnesota, Iowa City. Folks, the response has been almost universally positive. Americans want more passenger trains. 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 Here's a network map that shows not only our existing corridors in black, the yellow lines represent the enhancements to the existing corridors that we have, and the blue lines represent new routes, places that we would like to add to our network. Like I said, in our last pre-pandemic year, we carried more than 32 million customers. We think that in the next 15 years, by the addition of these routes, we will add 20 million more passengers annually to the Amtrak network, making us a more relevant travel mode for consumers all over the country who today do not have rail as a reliable mode for them. So at that, we will certainly we've again presented this to the Congress. We have been having conversations with our state governments and with communities around the country. In order to implement this, we will need your support. We will need you to let your representatives in the Congress know, and to an extent in your state houses as well, know that Amtrak has a bold vision that you think is worthwhile to provide relevant quality passenger rail service to the country. Again, I know I'm speaking with the High Speed Rail Alliance. This is not a purely high-speed rail expansion. This would be an expansion of conventional rail service. There will be segments of the network that will operate at higher speeds. We believe in an incremental development approach, and that by developing this system, it makes development of true high-speed services even more plausible to build upon this network.